I'm going to show you 4 sneaky bass tricks plus some mixing to help you take your bass sounds and arrangements to the next level. I use these bass tricks in my song Get On My Level, which is out now on Vanilla Ace's label Wildcard, and that sounds like this.
Get on my level. Get on my level.
If you want to grab Get On My Level on Beatport and support what I do, I'd be eternally grateful. Send your receipt to Zermelo at zermelomusic.com and I'll send you all the samples from this project. Big thanks in advance for your support. Now let's dive in. We need something to write the bass line to, so here are the basic drums. As you can hear, super simple, not too much syncopation because a lot of the syncopation is going to come from the bass. Now we also need a hook to write to, so I found this vocal buried on Splice.
You gotta get on my level.
So we got the drums, we got the vocal, we're ready to write the bass line, and the first technique I want to show you is the follow the leader technique. Here the bass follows whatever the main hook is doing. In Get On My Level, the main hook is the vocal, so I want the bass to follow the vocal. Now the most important part of this vocal is the my level lyric.
My level, my level.
And if I change the grid value here to 8th notes, you can see that my level is just playing on the 8th note. So here's my, le, and vol. So I want the bass line to do that. I want it to line up with those 8th notes and reinforce the vocal rhythm. I don't need the bass to be moving around a lot in pitch. This is just going to be rhythmic. So the fastest way for me to find the right sound is just to look for a sample. But don't worry, okay, we're also going to look at some sound design. But for now, we just need something really simple. So I found this sample. And as you can see, I lined it up with the vocal right here.
Get on my level. Get on my level.
Now, another important part of the vocal is the get on lyric.
Get on my.
Because as you can see, the get lands on the first beat, and if we zoom in a little bit and change the grid value to 16th notes, you can see that the on lyric lands on the 16th note right before the second beat. And this is the most important groove note in all music genres that get people dancing, because this is the note that helps create that classic danceable tresillo rhythm. And you know it. It goes like this. Boom, dip, boom, dip, boom. And that's what this note is all about. So I want the bass line to play that note as well. Now, once again, we don't need anything crazy here. We just need a rhythmic kind of bass sound. So I found this loop. Now we don't need all those notes. So if I zoom in here on the original, you see if I open this up in the clip, I have some clip gain automation just cutting out that note that we need. So if we play the two bass sounds together, the rhythmic percussive bass and the hookier bass sounds like this. Now, of course, both of those are following the vocal. So if we add the vocal in here.
Get on my level. Get on my level.
Now, a really sneaky thing about the follow the leader technique is that earlier in the track, when the bass line comes in before the vocal, people are going to internalize that rhythm through the bass line. So when the vocal finally comes in just a little bit later, it's already going to feel familiar to them. So we've got a solid 1-bar bass line right here with the bass sounds following what the vocal is doing, but we need some variation if we want this to be interesting over time rather than too repetitive. So we're going to introduce some basic call response. So in Get On My Level, I duplicated this first bass sound over, but I took these last 2 notes here and I just bumped them up by 1 semitone. So to get the call response going in the second, more percussive bass sound, you can see I've duplicated over the clip gain automation. So we're letting this note through, but I'm also letting through this second note here to get a little bit more groove and syncopation into the bass line. So the call has just 1 note, the response has 2 notes. So playing both of the bass sounds now, here is the full call response phrase. Now you can see from this bass sound and the original bass sound where we popped it up a semitone, the variations are very small. And that's because if there's too much variation going on, it gets a little jarring and exhausting to listen to. So small variations go a long way here. But here's the problem. You can see from the vocal, the first bass sound and the second bass sound, we have this gaping hole at the end of the bar, the 4th beat. The same thing over here in the second bar. So the third technique I want to show you now is filling the gaps. Now the fastest way for us to come up with some ideas, especially if we we don't have any is just to run through some bass loops. So over here on the left sidebar, I have this bass loops folder, and we could just type DM at the top here, DM for D minor, because that's the key of this track. And we can just start running through these and try to find something that just instantly grabs our attention. If we could just drag it in and it works, that's the best case scenario. But if we need to reprogram something, that's totally cool too. Now to fill out that first gap here, I found a couple cool bass loops. Here's the first one. And of course, I just needed to grab the part that's going to fill that gap. But you can hear that this sound has a really cool wide low-mid character, but it didn't have a lot of sub. So I literally just drew in a sine wave here in operator, and that's going to fill out the sub for that sound. The other bass loop I found is this guy. And you can immediately hear the cool part of that. It's just that whoomp. And so this one pretty much just worked as is. So adding these new sounds with the other ones, this is what filling that first gap sounds like. Now to fill this second gap here, we have this lovely wub sound. And this is a sound we did need to program because I needed control over it. You can see from the automation here, I wanted this sound to evolve over time. So in the beginning, it sounds like this, but at the end, it sounds like this. Now this sound is very, very simple, just like 90% of sound design in house, techno, and lots of other genres. It's just a saw wave into a filter. And I'm adding these other textural layers like oscillator 2 and the noise just to give a little bit of a unique character to the sound. But if I take those away, it's just a saw wave into a filter. Now I'm using the acid low pass here because I like the resonance. You can see I'm driving the resonance a little bit. The cutoff here is being controlled by envelope 3, and it has that slow attack, which gives that classic whoomp, that wub sound. Now, oscillator 2 is just a different wave table. I'll just go through these trying to find an interesting layer, and grown 1 was the winner here. And you can see I've also applied a randomization macro to the wavetable position. And that just means I'm going to get a different sound from this oscillator every single time. Let me play that for you. And then down here we have the noise layer. And that is just the aluminum noise here. And that just gives a very aggressive sound. And so all together, now, all of this is feeding the effects section, and here we have a dimension expander and a chorus ensemble. These are both doing the exact same thing, making the sound wide. So when I turn them off, it's going to be a mono sound, so really weak. And then when I turn it on, boom, it's going to open way up. And then I have all of this feeding a reverb, the Sound Toys Echo Plate reverb, and that's what's giving it a monster space in the mix. This right here is the reverb automation. You can see I'm trying to explode that sound at the end and just setting that up a little bit here. And then this is the filter automation that just slowly opens up, letting the sound get more and more aggressive over time. So playing all the bass sounds together, we have these two that are following the vocal. We have these bass sounds that are filling the gaps, and all together it sounds like this. So at this point, we've got a pretty interesting 2-bar bass line because the bass sounds that are filling the gap here also play into that call response that we created earlier in the first and second bar. But I don't want the listener to get bored at all, so we need to make sure that this is going to be interesting over 8 bars. So the fourth technique I want to show you are what I call punks. Punks is short for punctuation points. It's like the grammar of an 8-bar section. Gives you the opportunity to accent important structural moments for the listener. Simply put, do something at the 4-bar mark, do something at the 8, you're good. Now with punks, you could use any sound, drums, hooks, effects. I'm using bass sounds. So at the 4-bar mark, I have these two bass sounds here. And this first one here comes from a loop that we got from just looking for loops earlier. So I just like that last part there, and I just got rid of some of the resonance using some basic EQ. But that bon-bon, it feels like it needs to fall into a new sound, so I programmed the second sound. And that is a very simple sound. It's just a sine wave, some noise, and some distortion. So if I take away the distortion and the noise, it's just going to be a sine wave you'll see in the spectrum. Add in the noise, and then the magic comes from the aggressive tube distortion. And just like before, I'm pushing that into a dimension expander to give it a little bit of width. So before mono, after stereo. So playing this with the other bass sound. All All right, so that's the punk at the 4-bar mark. Let's now check out the punk at the 8-bar mark. And this one is very simple. I just took the main bass sound, bounced it down, and chucked it into a Valhalla Room reverb. So playing this with the other bass sounds. So my goal here was to take something that might seem complex and just show you how simple it really is. The first couple bass sounds that we looked at, they're just following the vocal. The next couple bass sounds that we looked at, they're just filling the gaps. And the last two bass sounds that we looked at, those are just giving those punk accents to make sure things are interesting over 8 bars. But hopefully this all adds up to be a very organized but exciting experience for the listener. And when every bass has its own role, has its own space like this, it makes the mixing very easy. So all these bass sounds are feeding this bass bus. And this right here, this rack, this is the bulk of the bass processing. All these other racks here are just filter automation and sidechain. So let's play some before and after. Starting with Redux, I'm just using the bit crusher to give the same gritty character to all the bass sounds. And then this EQ is just pulling that gritty character out with a high shelf. I'm also dipping down a little bit of the low end here just to make sure that kick sub punches over the low end of the bass. But the most important thing is this gritty texture. So this is before. And then here we have the glue compressor and the saturator. These are doing the exact same thing. They're just squeezing the bass sounds, gluing them together, and bringing them way forward in the mix. So before, then after. So they bring it from here to boom, right there in your face. Now, I've only been playing the bass with the kick, no drums, because now I want to play the track from break 1 into the first drop so you can feel the full groove come in with the full drums and all the bass layers that we've been looking at. Now, don't forget, if you like Get On My Level and you want to support what I'm doing, then grab the track on Beatport and send me your receipt and I will send you the samples from this project. But now let's go ahead and play break 1 into the first drop so we can hear how this all comes together. Here we go.